Hey guys, welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're looking at the penultimate encounter in the Battle of Dazar'alor, Stormwall Blockade.
This two-phase fight has few abilities, so it's pretty easy to get your head around. The difficulty in the fight while we were testing was a little bit unclear, so we're not totally sure what you guys need to focus on when this fight comes out in a week or so, but we'll talk more about that towards the end of the video. For now, let's jump in and start with phase 1.
So before you start the encounter, you'll need to split your raid evenly into two different groups, and then each group must click either the left or right dinosaur to be taken out to the two ships out in the bay. Now each ship has its own boss, but they will swap around, so understanding both of their mechanics is very important. Now whilst fighting on the ships, the elemental boss at the end of the docks will be gaining energy from various sources. If this reaches 100%, he'll instantly wipe the entire raid, so it's important that this first phase is done nice and quickly and cleanly so the boss doesn't gain too much energy. Now whilst fighting Sister Catherine, there are three things to watch out for. One, and most importantly, is the voltaic flash. Orbs will spawn in set locations and then fire to the other side of the ship. Getting hit by this orb deals a large amount of damage, so you've got to avoid them fast. Now these move very quickly after they spawn, so it's not necessarily easy to do so, and there are multiple patterns, but what pattern the boss uses seems to be random. A few of these patterns are that you'll have descending single lines. This could either be vertically or horizontally across the ship. The other one is that you'll get orbs in lines of 3. Horizontally this will cover one half of the ship and then the other, and vertically it can do 1/3, then a different third, then the final remaining third, or it can do 2/3 at once and then the one remaining third, or it can just do half the ship, half the ship. Basically, there's lots of orbs, and these orbs are bad, and you need to do your best to dodge them. We found the best way to counter these orbs is just to be standing towards the middle of the ship, but slightly to one side towards either the bow or stern of the ship. This location should give you ample time to react to any of the voltaic flashes, no matter what the pattern. The second ability that you need to watch out for while fighting Catherine is Crackling Lightning. This is a spell directed on a random player that deals a burst of damage to them and all players within 6 yards shortly after they've received notification of the spell. When hit, you'll leave behind a puddle that will explode again shortly afterwards and send out a wave that deals damage and silences you. The further you are from the epicenter, the less damage you take and the shorter the silence is. It is vital that the guy originally targeted by this moves to one side of the ship so that the rest of the raid has ample space to move from it. The third key thing you need to watch out for is Electric Shroud. The boss will place an absorb shield on herself and begin to channel into the elemental boss on the dock. You've got to break the shield fast, which will allow you to interrupt the channel, which is giving him energy. Aside from that, Catherine will also cast a volley on the group. Healers just have to top off the damage.
While fighting Brother Joseph, there are also three things to keep an eye out for. One is the sea storms that will spawn underneath random players. These do immediate damage to all players within 5 yards when they spawn, which stops you from sacking them up. They then deal ticking damage and slow you if you're stood within them. You've just got to move from them the moment they spawn. Second is that he'll spawn a siren on the side of the ship. This will channel on a random player, causing them to move uncontrollably towards the siren whilst taking ticking damage. If they reach the siren, they'll jump off the ship and just drown, so DPS needs to swap and kill off the siren immediately. You do get a brief cast on you before the mind control kicks in, so the afflicted player does have time to move as far away from the siren as possible. The player can also position themselves so there are sea storm patches between themselves and the siren, which they can actually use to slow themselves down. You can also live crit players if you really need to. Third to mention is the Tidal Shroud. Just like Catherine, he'll gain an absorption shield and begin to channel into Laminaria on the dock. Just break the shield to interrupt the channel. He'll also cast a volley. Again, healers just need to keep topping up the random damage.
Now when either of the bosses get to 50% health, they'll swap ships. This is why you need to know both of their mechanics. However, they do not have a shared health pool, and this means if you're reckless with health percentages and they do not swap at the same time, one ship will have to deal with both of them simultaneously. Whilst testing, this made the non-occupied ship get bombarded with targeting circles that you need to dodge, which we dealt with by stacking up and moving as a group. But we should note this is not listed in the dungeon journal anymore. Regardless, on live you want both bosses to hit 50% as close to the same time as possible. Once they've swapped and you've managed to kill them off, you can interact with the pedestal to take you back to the dock where you can begin to fight Laminaria and phase 2 begins.
Once everyone's at the docks, you need to make sure that you interrupt the catastrophic tides before it one-shots the entire raid, and then the phase begins. Throughout the phase, the boss will cast Sea Swell. This places patches underneath players after the cast is finished. These patches deal ticking damage and will quickly fill up the space that you have to work in. This is solved by the energized storm ads. These guys will move towards the boss, and once they're within range, they'll begin to channel on him, which gives him energy. You can use almost all forms of crowd control on these guys, including things like banish, to prevent them from reaching the boss. When these adds do die, they leave behind an orb. These orbs deal pulsing ticking damage to the raid until someone picks it up. Picking it up will debuff you with Storm's Wail. This debuff allows you to soak up all the patches of Sea Swell. However, when the debuff times out, the ad will respawn. So you'll need to kill at least one ad consistently throughout the fight to keep the area clear from all the patches, whilst all the other remaining ads are kept far away from the boss. Whilst we were testing, multiple people could actually pick up a single orb, meaning that you're also going to spawn multiple ads. We don't think this is intended, but keep it in mind when you go to pull this boss on live servers. Another spell to deal with is the Ire of the Deep. This causes an orb to slowly fall into a zone. If the orb hits the ground, it deals massive raid-wide damage and just spawns a load more Sea Swell patches, so you're going to need to soak it. Soaking the orb deals very high damage, but it is split between all players. To make it safe, we found 3 players or more was ideal. Whilst testing, this also made the orb respawn a couple of times more before it eventually despawned, but looking at the dungeon journal since, it's not clear if that's still the case. Last thing to mention is that tanks will get hit with kelp-wrapped fists. This applies a stacking dot that also reduces your movement speed. When it expires, it'll apply a debuff to all nearby players, increasing the damage they take based on the number of stacks the tank had. The range on this we're not totally sure of, but whilst we were testing, we rarely had it jump to any other players. Our guess is that it's no more than 10 yards. One thing we do know though is that if you time out the debuff on top of an ad, he'll gain the debuff instead, which is actually pretty handy because it means you can kill off ads a lot faster. Also to mention for tanks, if no one is within melee range of the boss will hit people with a reaching attack, which will kill them off very quickly. So tanks, you need to make sure at least one of you is in range of the boss at all times. But that's all the mechanics, and that should give you an idea of how this last phase works. It really does seem that you just need to find a balance of ad damage as well as boss damage, so you can continue to clear the Sea Swell patches and still be able to kill the boss. Whilst you of course soak orbs and crowd control any additional ads that you're not planning on using. What do we think?
So the testing for this boss both times was incredibly bugged, and the PTR was just full of disconnects anyway, so we didn't really get to see the boss as much as we wanted to.
Yeah.
One of the tests, the main boss didn't even have a skin and was considered out of line of sight, and it was like this tiny little cute blue box. It was so stupid. It was a good laugh, but it was kind of a waste of time. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we don't really know what the hard part of the fight is. Penultimate bosses are usually pretty difficult, or at least noticeably more difficult than the previous bosses in the instance, so it's safe to say that this boss won't be a pushover, but because it was broken in both tests, it was kind of hard to gauge where the challenge of the encounter is exactly going to be. My guess is the main thing you'll need to get your head around in the encounter is dealing with the patches in the last phase, and finding a balance of how much damage you need to put into the ads to kill them off, and how many you can just try and keep at bay with crowd control. And the whole thing with crowd control as well is that different CC options worked on different tests. As an example, you couldn't banish them on the first test, but you could on the second. And you could knock them back on the first test, but you couldn't on the second. Slows worked all the time, and I think they fucked up, and it's just supposed to be slows, personally. I don't think you're going to be able to stun them, I don't think you're going to be able to grip them or knock them around or anything like that. You're just going to have to place them really far back, slow them down, slowly whittle them down as they get close to the boss, and just before they reach the boss, you kill them, clear patches, move the ad back to the back of the room, and just keep repeating that cycle. So basically you're going to have a bunch of really happy boomkins and warlocks and shadow priests just kind of constantly cleaving them down as they slowly reach towards the boss.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, I think
that I can see the fight actually being.
But who knows? The ads will probably not even be there on live. This fight's just so weird.
Yeah,
It just doesn't seem to make much sense. But difficulty aside, the encounter as a whole is pretty decent. One thing I would like to mention is that perhaps the voltaic flash orbs, they are maybe a little bit too quick, especially on heroic.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So they could probably be slowed down a little bit just to give people a little bit more wiggle room. Or maybe just reduce the damage of it on heroic and normal, just so if you do fuck up, which is quite likely, you know, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And maybe just make it that much more punishing on mythic.
But as for the rest of the fight, there's something there. There's a solid fight there. It's just what version are we going to see?
And that's going to be the interesting part, I suppose.
It is, yeah. And of course we will have a live guide for this next week, so look out for that on the channel. But that's all we've got time for, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this little boss preview, then please do drop us down a like. It helps us out very, very much. And we shall see you with the Jaina preview in the next day or so.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.